You know how incoming presidents usually lay low before they take office? Not this time. Donald Trump's making a huge push for peace in Gaza before his inauguration. And, well, we're going to dive into why.
Yeah, it's a very unusual situation, isn't it? You got the conflict that's still going on, American hostages are being held, and Trump is making these very public demands.
And he's not even sworn in yet.
Nope, not yet.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
And we've got some really interesting expert analysis to try to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
People like Wolfgang Postai, Hussein Avish, Trita Parsi, Adam Shapiro.
Okay, great.
We're also going to be looking at Trump's own statements and the current political landscape.
Sounds good.
So I guess the question that is really driving this deep dive is this push for peace in Gaza just about helping people, or is there something else going on?
I mean, it's probably safe to say there's more to the story.
Yeah.
If you look at what these experts are saying, it seems like Trump's motivations are pretty layered. It's not just one thing that's pushing him to act,
Right.
like Wolfgang Postai, for example.
Okay.
He suggests that this could be a power play, right out of the gate for Trump, a way to look strong on the world stage.
Oh, interesting. So like almost like a way to kind of establish himself right away.
Exactly. Project Strength, make a bold move.
It's interesting because that does align with how he's operated in the past.
Oh, absolutely.
Hey, remember how often he insisted that he could have prevented this conflict
Oh, all the time.
if he had been president?
Yep. Classic Trump.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all about image and proving himself.
Which, you could say, okay, well, that makes sense, for him.
Sure.
But then that also has huge implications for the region as a whole.
Absolutely.
We're talking about peace in Gaza.
Right. Something that people have been trying to figure out for a long time.
Yeah, for years, decades.
And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
We have to remember that Trump has been so vocal about his pride in the Abraham Accords.
Okay, and remind me again, what are the Abraham Accords?
So, the Abraham Accords, basically they normalized relations between Israel and several Arab countries.
Okay.
The UAE, Bahrain, and it was a huge deal, seen as this major breakthrough.
Right, okay.
And Trump really wants to expand those accords, particularly to bring Saudi Arabia in.
Gotcha. Okay.
And here's the thing. Saudi Arabia has made it very clear that they want to see progress in Gaza, movement towards a Palestinian state, before they'll even consider joining the accords.
That's almost like a condition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, show us you're serious about peace, then we'll talk.
So a win in Gaza is like a key.
It's a key that unlocks this bigger diplomatic win.
With Saudi Arabia.
Exactly.
Wow.
So if Trump can pull this off, if he could broker a peace deal before he even steps foot in the Oval Office,
Right.
it would be huge for his credibility.
Yeah.
And it could seriously change the balance of power in the Middle East.
That's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
And it's not just about Saudi Arabia, right?
Right.
And Hussein Abish, he talks about how the entire regional landscape has shifted, creating this new opportunity for negotiation.
Absolutely. And it's important to understand those shifts.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. The fall of the Assad regime in Syria,
Yeah.
the rise of Turkey, these have been massive changes.
It's huge, yeah.
And they've really impacted Hamas, particularly their alliances.
So help me understand that a little bit better.
Sure.
You've got these massive shifts happening, right? Assad's regime crumbling, Turkey rising in power.
Right.
How does that impact Hamas and their willingness to negotiate?
Well, for Hamas, losing Assad was a big blow.
Okay.
He was a key ally.
Right.
And while Turkey supports the Palestinian cause, they don't have the same ties to Hamas that Assad did.
I see.
So Hamas is in a tough spot, more isolated.
So they're kind of feeling the pressure.
Exactly. They need to show results, and they're under pressure to deliver.
Okay, so they're more vulnerable.
More vulnerable and potentially more willing to compromise.
That makes sense. Okay.
And, as Trita Parsi points out,
Yeah.
a pre-inauguration ceasefire would let Trump claim a quick win without getting bogged down in the long-term complexities of this conflict.
So it's a win for Trump either way.
Exactly. He gets to look like the hero.
Without having to deal with the messy aftermath.
You got it?
He wants the victory, but not the commitment.
That's a very sharp observation.
Yeah. Adam Shapiro, he takes a slightly different angle.
Okay.
He argues that Trump might be using this to actually shift focus away from prolonged foreign engagements
Interesting.
and prioritize areas closer to home.
Like what?
Well, Shapiro believes that Trump sees this as a chance to sort of demonstrate strength and then move on.
Okay.
He wants to focus on confronting China.
Right, which we know is a big thing for him.
Yeah, and empowering Israel.
Two of his key foreign policy goals.
Exactly. And it's interesting because Shapiro also mentions Trump's interest in, and this might sound strange,
Okay.
expanding American influence in places like Greenland. Greenland.
Wow.
It might seem outlandish.
It does a little bit.
But I think it speaks to his desire for these tangible acquisitions, projecting American power.
It's definitely a unique approach to foreign policy.
For sure.
But getting back to Gaza,
Yeah.
it seems like both Hamas and Israel are signaling that they might be ready for a deal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there are signs.
Okay.
Hamas, they're facing pressure to release those hostages.
Right.
And the Israeli military, well, they don't really see a strategic advantage in continuing the conflict.
So both sides are kind of like, maybe this is enough.
Yeah, kind of.
But it's never that simple in the Middle East, right?
You're telling me?
There are always complications.
Always.
And I bet one of those complications is Netanyahu.
You're on the right track.
Right. His own political goals could be a roadblock to peace.
It's definitely something to consider.
Because, Netanyahu has made his entire career on this image of strength.
Right, the strong man.
And a peace deal, especially one that looks like he's giving in to Hamas, that could really weaken his position.
Absolutely, it could make him look weak.
So even if Hamas and Trump are ready to make a deal, Netanyahu might actually benefit more from keeping the conflict going.
That's the question we need to ask, right?
Yeah.
What's in it for Netanyahu?
It's like this high-stakes game of chess.
A very good analogy.
And we can't forget the human element.
Oh, absolutely not.
I mean, we've been talking a lot about politics, strategy.
Yeah.
But there are real lives at stake here.
Absolutely. The hostages, their families.
American citizens caught in the middle of all of this.
It adds a whole other layer of complexity to an already delicate situation.
Yeah.
And it raises so many questions about what role those hostages play in Trump's thinking.
This is turning out to be such an intricate situation.
Yeah, it really is.
Lots of moving parts.
Layers upon layers.
And we've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still so much more to explore.
Oh, we're just getting started.
We're just talking about those hostages and how their situation just adds, another layer of complexity to this whole peace push.
Right.
And it makes you wonder how much of a factor are they in Trump's calculations? Because he has been pretty vocal about getting them home.
Oh, it's definitely a major driving force for him.
Yeah.
Remember those statements he made about unleashing hell if the hostages weren't released?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that wasn't just tough talk.
Right.
It reflects this core belief that America doesn't negotiate with people who take its citizens hostage.
Which is kind of ironic, isn't it?
How so?
Well, because that's exactly what this whole peace push looks like, right? It's like a negotiation to secure their release.
You're right to point that out.
Yeah.
It does seem contradictory.
Yeah.
But I think for Trump, it's more nuanced than that. He sees himself as this master deal maker.
Right.
Someone who can achieve what others can't.
Right.
He probably believes he can get the hostages back and also secure a broader peace agreement at the same time.
So it's a high-risk, high-reward strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we can't forget about the optics of it all.
The PR.
The PR, exactly.
Yeah.
If he can pull this off, it's a huge win.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine the headlines. Trump frees hostages, secures peace in Gaza.
Oh, yeah. He'd eat that up.
It plays right into that image of strength, decisiveness.
It would be a powerful narrative.
Oh, yeah.
And it would kind of echo that Reagan comparison we were talking about earlier, wouldn't it?
In what way?
Well, you have an American president freeing hostages held by a hostile force.
Right. It's a classic story, resonates with people.
For sure.
But there's a crucial difference here.
What's that?
Reagan was dealing with Iran, a nation state.
Right.
Trump is dealing with Hamas, a non-state actor.
Right. Okay.
And that brings a whole other set of challenges.
So how do you negotiate with a group that doesn't have the same kind of political structure or accountability as a country? Like, how do you even make sure they stick to any agreement that's reached?
Yeah, those are the million-dollar questions.
Right.
This is uncharted territory in a lot of ways. And it just highlights how difficult this whole thing is.
Yeah.
We've got all these competing interests, conflicting motivations, and then the very real possibility that things could fall apart really quickly.
Okay, before we get into what happens if a deal is actually reached, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Okay.
The Abraham Accords in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
How does a potential peace deal in Gaza impact those?
So the Abraham Accords, those were a significant foreign policy achievement for Trump.
Right. He loves to talk about those.
He does. He sees them as this template for peace in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And he's been very clear that he wants to expand them.
And Saudi Arabia is the big prize, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they've been hesitant. They've said they want to see progress on the Palestinian front
Okay.
before they'll even think about joining.
Right.
So a peace deal in Gaza, that could be the key that unlocks Saudi participation in the Accords.
Which would be a major, major win for Trump.
Absolutely a game changer.
Yeah.
Solidify his legacy as peacemaker.
Wow.
Could reshape the entire geopolitical landscape of the Middle East.
It's like a domino effect, right?
Yes.
One piece falls, and then everything starts to shift.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And that's why this is so fascinating to watch unfold,
Yeah.
this convergence of events, personalities, political maneuvering.
Yeah.
It could have far-reaching consequences.
So let's play this out, right? Let's say, for the sake of argument, that Trump pulls this off.
Go ahead.
He gets the hostages released, he brokers a peace agreement, and all this happens before he even takes office.
Right.
What happens then?
Well, I mean, in the immediate aftermath,
Yeah.
it would obviously be a huge relief for the people of Gaza.
Right.
They've endured so much suffering,
Oh, absolutely.
hardship over the years.
For sure.
It would also be a significant victory for Trump.
Obviously.
He enters the presidency with this major foreign policy achievement.
But what about the long-term effects? I mean, would peace actually hold?
That's a more complicated question.
Right.
A peace deal, no matter how well-intentioned,
Yeah.
it doesn't erase decades of mistrust and animosity overnight.
Right.
There would still be deep divisions,
Yeah.
unresolved issues, and that ever-present risk of renewed violence.
So it's not a magic solution.
Not at all.
Okay.
But it could be a step in the right direction,
Yeah.
Create a framework for dialogue, cooperation,
Yeah.
hopefully a more peaceful and prosperous future for both Israelis and Palestinians.
That makes sense, but it hinges on the deal working.
Of course.
Both sides actually honoring their commitment.
Exactly.
Right?
And we can't forget about all those potential obstacles we discussed,
Right.
Netanyahu's political motivations,
Right.
the difficulty of enforcing agreements with non-state actors like Hamas,
Yeah.
the deep-seated mistrust. I mean, it permeates this entire conflict.
Right. It's a fragile situation.
Very fragile.
And even if a deal is signed,
Yeah.
there's still the question of implementation, right?
Right.
Like, how do you actually make sure that both sides follow through?
Yeah.
How do you prevent, spoilers from derailing the whole thing?
These are all valid concerns.
Right.
It's a long and arduous process.
Yeah,
There will be setbacks along the way,
I'm sure.
but I think it's important to acknowledge that even attempting to achieve peace
Yeah.
in such a complex and volatile environment, it's a significant undertaking.
So cautious optimism.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
There's reason for hope, but we also need to be realistic.
Right.
Peace in Gaza would be monumental, but it's not the end of the story.
Right.
It's the beginning of a new chapter,
Yeah.
one filled with opportunities and challenges.
And I imagine those challenges extend beyond the region itself.
Right, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We need to think about the global implications as well.
Okay.
What does a peace agreement in Gaza mean for the United States' relationships with other countries, especially major players like China and Russia?
That's a great point. We've been so focused on the immediate situation.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in the here and now.
But this really has the potential to ripple outwards and impact the whole world.
Exactly. So let's shift our focus now and consider that broader geopolitical landscape.
Okay.
How might this peace initiative, if successful, reshape the balance of power in the Middle East and beyond? So we were talking about how a peace deal in Gaza, could actually have these ripple effects far beyond the region itself.
Right, right.
And how it could impact the whole world.
Yeah. What are some of the global implications we should be thinking about?
Well, one of the biggest has to do with the relationship between the United States and China.
Okay.
Remember earlier when we were talking about Adam Shapiro's analysis?
Yeah, yeah.
He believes that confronting China is a top priority for Trump.
Right, right. He wants to shift focus away from those long-term foreign engagements
Exactly.
and concentrate on areas where he sees more immediate gains.
Yeah, like boosting American influence closer to home and pushing back against China.
Okay.
So resolving the conflict in Gaza could actually play right into that. It frees up resources, allows the administration to focus more on China.
So it's almost like clearing the decks.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting this long-standing conflict off the table so we can focus on the bigger game.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And that shift, that has the potential to really change the balance of power globally.
In what way?
Well, a more assertive America in the Middle East
Yeah.
could be seen as a counter to China's growing influence.
Oh, interesting. So not just in the region, but worldwide.
Exactly. It's a global game.
Of course, we can't talk about global power dynamics without bringing up Russia.
Right. The other big player.
How might a peace deal in Gaza affect the relationship between the U.S. and Russia?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's a tough one to answer.
Okay.
I mean, Russia has its own interests in the Middle East,
Of course.
and they don't always line up with American interests.
Right.
A peace deal that strengthens America's position in the region could be seen as a challenge to Russian influence.
So it could create some friction.
Yeah, definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that diplomacy is complex.
Right.
There's always potential for unexpected outcomes.
For sure.
A peace deal could also open up opportunities for cooperation.
Okay. Yeah.
If both the U.S. and Russia see it as beneficial, it might lead to a more collaborative approach.
So it's really hard to say for sure how things will play out.
It really is.
There are just so many different factors to consider.
So many moving pieces.
So many potential reactions and consequences.
Yeah, it's like you make one move,
Yeah.
and then 10 other things happen.
It's a chain reaction.
Exactly.
It's almost impossible to predict.
It's a reminder that we're dealing with a very intricate system.
Yeah.
Multiple players, competing interests, shifting alliances.
Yeah.
It's like this giant, constantly evolving puzzle. And predicting the long-term consequences of any single event is just, well, next to impossible.
So while we can speculate about what a peace deal in Gaza might mean for the world, we ultimately just have to acknowledge that the future is uncertain.
That's right, but that's also what makes it all so fascinating, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
It's a reminder that the world is constantly changing.
Yeah.
And what happens in one seemingly isolated corner of the globe
Right.
can have these reverberations that reach far and wide.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed.
Yeah.
Engage with these complex issues. Consider the different viewpoints and potential outcomes.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into this whole, pre-inauguration peace push,
Right.
what's the one key takeaway you hope listeners will walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway is that this situation, it's like this miniature version of the challenges and opportunities we face in the world today.
Okay.
It's a story about ambition, political strategy, global rivalries.
Right. And this persistent human desire for peace.
Yeah.
It shows us that even in the most complicated and seemingly unsolvable conflicts, there's always a chance for things to change for the better.
It's a nice thought.
It is.
It definitely leaves us with a lot to think about.
It does.
The possibilities for peace, the risks involved, the impact on ordinary people's lives,
For sure.
and the potential for these global shifts in power.
It's a story that's still unfolding.
Yeah.
And the ending is far from certain.
That's for sure.
But it's definitely a story worth paying attention to.
Well, that's what we'll continue to do here on The Deep Dive.
Always.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back soon to explore another topic that's shaping our world.
Sounds good.
Until then, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep learning.